evaluate the following exponential expressions, let me remind you of one of the rules for exponents that we covered in class. If we take a number and raise it to a negative power, that's equivalent to going 1 over x to the n. So in other words, negative exponent, you can think of that as being a reciprocal. So you take x to the n like you normally would, as if it were not a negative exponent, and then you take the reciprocal. And it's important to think of it as a reciprocal as opposed to flipping it down to the bottom, because it will take things that are in the bottom, and if things in the bottom have negative exponents, they will get flipped up to the top. They'll get moved to the other side of the fraction line. Okay, so now, with that under our belt, let's perform the problem. So, the first problem is negative 8 raised to the negative 2 power. Now I know from multiplication that negative 8 times negative 8 is the number 64. So negative 8 times negative 8, negative times negative is positive, and I'm going to get negative 8 squared is 64. So if this had just said squaring, just to the power of positive 2, the answer would be 64. What does the negative exponent mean then? Reciprocal. 1 over 64. Next, negative 9 to the power of negative 1. Well, negative 9 is a negative number, and if we raise that to the power of just 1, we would have negative 9. Now, the only difference that occurs here is that we're not raising to the power of just 1, we're raising to the power of negative 1. So that's going to move things to the denominator. It's going to be a reciprocal. So the answer here is going to be negative 1 over 9. Personally, I prefer to write my negatives out in front, so I would call this negative 1/9. Now for a final problem, try negative 2 to the negative 3. Really try this on your own. Pause the video and see if you can figure out what the answer is here before I write it down. But assuming you took a second out and tried this on your own, negative 2 to the negative 3, well, if you think about what negative 2 cubed would be, that would be negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2, which would be 4 multiplied by negative 2, and that would be negative 8. So I guess we should be getting an answer here of negative 8. But the exponent is negative, so that means we're going to have to perform a reciprocal. So our answer will actually be 1 over negative 8. And again, for politeness sake, I usually like to write this as negative 1/8.